Cool. The messages are a little easier to see on this compared to Zoom. But hey everyone, welcome to Module 4. Yes, I am Zach Mays. The robot game is fun, yeah. Zach, you're muted. Yeah, cool. So we are getting started on Module 4. And what that means is, one, you have persisted to this point. So great job. Zach and we've talked about this, and I think we should make note of the fact that like this is probably the highest retention that we've probably ever had up until this point in this module. And in a lot of ways, this is kind of the module that we've been working towards. So what's really cool about this particular module is just that we're going to be building with some really cool technologies, and we're going to be building in such a way that is going to be directly applicable to like a job setting, and to like some stuff that you'll see in kind of the. And I'm partial to this particular module because, and I know Zach is this way too, but like I like my job at work is working on React, a React application. I'm on a checkout team, so like at our company, the checkout flow is a React application that that I'm in the code base every single day. And I think it's really cool to, it's a really, really good technology to learn, which is why we choose to teach it. And on top of that, there's a lot of, I would say probably, well, I would say a high percentage of junior developers coming out of boot camps or coming out of school or whatever get started using this technology. So it's really, really important technology to learn. Regardless of whether like the role that you end up getting applies directly to it, or if it's just something you kind of are kind of familiar with it. I'll be honest, like I'm not really a good front-end developer, but like I am a front-end developer at my company because I just know React, and I have like there's like some areas of the code base that I can apply my sort of like expertise on. I'm not good at making applications look good, but like I like how they work and how the data flows, and React is really conducive to that. And I'll kind of show you what that means. So let me go ahead and start sharing my screen here. Let me do this. Sorry about this. I'm not sure why this is the case, but I have to give the same permissions. I'll be right back. Sorry about that. Now we can share. Okay, that's my email, so don't read that. Cool. I'll just do this, and then I will do this. Sorry. Okay, so I wanted really just to show a couple of the things that we're getting after here, and just kind of go over them that way. So the thing that we really wanted to kind of like try and cover and help you get an understanding of is, okay, so we have JavaScript, right? We have these different ways of using JavaScript in the browser and the front end, and we want to build stuff, right? So then I guess the question that kind of is important to understand the context of is like, what is React and why was it made, right? So what problem is it solving? That's kind of a common thread that you'll see in engineering, that like in software development, is that like there's a reason why someone wanted to solve this problem, and figuring out what that reason is very specifically, and understanding the problem and understanding the solution really sheds a lot of light on the concept itself. So in this case, we need to understand a little bit more about like some of the stuff we've already used, particularly the document. So like, if you remember in the previous modules, we used this thing called the document. We would do document.get element by ID, all that kind of stuff. And so that's like one way of manipulating essentially what's on the page. The problem with it is that the way that you end up writing very complex applications with this ends up becoming very tedious, right? So imagine that you have something as complicated as, say, let me let that person in 1 second. So when you have really, really complex applications, essentially what ends up happening is you have this big back and forth where you have the document on one hand and then what's in your code on the other. Your code becomes extremely messy, and if you've ever had the pleasure of getting into vanilla JavaScript application, you would see just how messy it is. This is one of those things that like you can try it for yourself and see how you like it, but the reality is that whenever you talk about like working for a company and working for a company at scale, in order to be able to build these big applications that do lots of things, then like you quickly run into this, and it's kind of a universal experience. So in the history of JavaScript, we have these different libraries. React is a library, which is just a set of helper functions and like utilities. In other words, code that allows you to then like be able to build stuff easier without having to rewrite all that code again. I mean, reusability of code is very important, and libraries are just a way of people like open sourcing and sharing that as they build it. So one of the things that happened along the way is that a library called jQuery was introduced. And the reason that I bring this up is because you'll see jQuery code. And essentially what happens in jQuery code is, and I can make this a little bit bigger, but is it creates a bunch of shortcuts to being able to do the document.get element type stuff. Like essentially this is the syntax for document.get element by ID. And is this like blurry? Do I need to? I can see me sharing my own screen. Okay. Let's try it this way. Is getting it bigger helping at all, or is it still blurry?
It might have helped a little bit, but it's still blurry.
Okay. I can see a mirror of it and it looks clear on mine, but that's probably just because it's coming from mine. Let me just do this and then reshare. Actually, I think I know what's going on. Let's do. Is that any better?
No.
Okay.
Can you make it any bigger?
This is like super huge on my screen. Okay. That's about as big as I can get it. We'll just have to figure out that for next time. So apologies about that. I can send out the links to all this so you can take a look. But so really, like, the reason that I bring up the kind of the history of like what was created is because, like, the evolution is that we wanted to be able to, you know, make essentially front-end development a lot easier for people and a lot more straightforward. And like front-end development is just taking things in code and putting them into the DOM, taking them out of the DOM. And by DOM, I mean like the actual what's painted onto the browser. So into the document, out of the document, attaching and handling interactions. So like, you know, I always think of like JavaScript as kind of like the muscles. Like if HTML is the skeleton and CSS is like, you know, hair and makeup and skin and all that, and then JavaScript is like the muscles and the energy that make it move around. It makes it interactive. So we kind of have this evolution of the web where we go from static websites to these very dynamic web applications that, you know, save information to a server and all of this. And jQuery was a very, very important way of going about that. The problem is that you're still doing essentially the same thing. Yes, your code is shorter, but like at the end of the day, you're still having to keep up with two things. One is what is being rendered to your user, and the second being what is happening in your code. React comes along and works a little bit differently. Okay, so React takes care of what gets put into the what the user sees, what gets rendered into the document. So I think I'll go ahead and actually stop sharing this and share our repository here, and I can make it really big too. Let's do this. So the thing about React is, and about this idea of like web applications, right, is that whenever we have made this shift to these web applications, we're interacting with data. The user is creating data, they're inputting data, they are loading data, they're saving data. It's all data being like passed in and out. And so what the developers realized is, well, what's important is not necessarily like the document itself. What's important is the data. And so React works off this concept that whatever is in the state of the application, that's a word that you'll hear in the curriculum, is this idea that like this application has state. It has state of what, you know, the data that was coming from the server or the data that was being input by the user, any of that kind of thing that's put into this kind of like umbrella term called state. And the idea is that React is then supposed to change what is being rendered on your behalf You don't have to worry about it in order to show what is in the data based on your code. So it's just JavaScript. So it's just building off of the principles that you started to learn in the previous 2 modules. But it takes it a step further, and it has a really powerful rendering engine that essentially like decides for you, like this is when I'm supposed to make a change based on what's on the document, what's being rendered. And you can control that through the flow of the data rather than doing it manually through an interaction with the document. So we'll kind of see how that works a little bit. So you just focus on the data, and it will worry about what the page looks like. And that just allows you to build. So a lot of things with libraries is that, like, you know, you want to have a good developer experience. Like, that's very important to everyone involved, because happy developers build great things, right? So like being able to work with tools that you enjoy is really important as far as like development of libraries and things like that. So, okay, so what I want to just kind of cover is like there's the one kind of downside with working with libraries like this, which, by the way, so after jQuery came along, there's 3 main frameworks or libraries that were used for front-end development: Vue.js, Vue, AngularJS, which was the first one on the scene, and then React.js. React, if you were to look at statistics, React is overwhelmingly kind of like the leader. Vue and Angular are different from React, but still, as a beginner, you can kind of like get in and try to learn any of them. And some companies use one over the other, but really like learning one and the concepts of one will help you kind of across. It's kind of like learning one programming language. Like, it is a challenge to move over to another one, but like you have enough context that it should be a lot easier than learning the first one. So like I've written an application in Vue. It was really easy to learn, and I've written in React. The other good upside with React is that you can write in React Native, which is a mobile framework. And it allows you to write, instead of it being like just a web app that's mobile friendly, it's an actual native app that you could like put in the App Store. So that's another benefit to learning React as well. So part of learning these libraries, any of them, is that there's tooling involved. And really the only good way to get a project off the ground that's in React is to do this command right here, npx create React app. And I'll show you kind of how that works. The other way is kind of what is exemplified in the curriculum. So if you remember in the curriculum here, there's a Kinsey Dodds course. That's kind of what we're going through. And he actually creates an application in a code sandbox and just imports React directly. So essentially what Kent is doing in the code sandbox here is being handled for you whenever you do create React app. So it's the same way to get to this. It's the 2 different things to get to the same goal, but he's just doing it a different way. So I'll show you an example of how he was kind of doing it, and then we'll also show you how to create a React app. And anytime you want a new application, you can always start with that and get going. And then we kind of want to show, you know, what does it look like to use like this concept of components, right? So one of the hard things about, like, say, jQuery in HTML is that, like, it's kind of hard to create modular code, meaning your main HTML is going to be like in one giant HTML file, and then it might have like several scripts, but it's hard to know exactly what the page is going to look like based on that. React is a little bit different because it's kind of it has its kind of state and data baked into it. You'll be able to structure like your actual code files in a way that represent how your application is structured. So a really good example is like if you just take a look at VS Code. VS Code, I'm pretty sure is written in React actually. So I'm taking a look. I have a sidebar over here. I have like my Explorer right here with these little drop downs and different things like that. I have my tabs in my actual editor. I have panels, and I have my top bar here and my bottom bar here. Like it would be really hard for me in just an HTML file to structure it this way. But in React, I can structure all my files to essentially be like, okay, I have my sidebar component, and and the sidebar renders a list of these different sidebar item components. And then I have my content component, and it can have, any type of content in it, and it's going to have a certain it's going to have a certain style to it, right? So like this is Markdown, which is why it looks this way, versus like JavaScript versus Python, that kind of thing. So that's one really big benefit of React, is being able to modularize and create components of your code to where each of those files only has a certain thing that it's worried about. We call that separation of concerns. So we're able to take those concerns and put them in one place, which also means we can reuse them, which also means that whenever you're coming into someone else's code, you're going to have an easier time figuring out what's going on, which is very important in a job setting. Okay, so I have a little React application I'm going to pull up real quick. So I have, perfect, okay. So I guess I can only share one window at a time, unless or it'll look blurry to y'all. So I'm just gonna do this. Maybe too much. Okay, so what we have here is we have just one index.html file. This is not the recommended way to do this, but this is just what Kent Dodds does in order to like kind of show what's going on. And so what I want to show you is that, looks like I might have it here going on. So the idea behind React is that you have this library, React and React DOM, these two that you see up here, that handle a bunch of things for you. They're the libraries that handle inserting into, like, rendering the different like rendering the data in a way that you've coded and all that. And then you'll see this thing called Babel. This is like a way that it uses to translate the code into a slightly different structure in order to make it more efficient and in a way and standardized, because there's lots of different versions of JavaScript, all that kind of stuff. So Babel just makes sure that the browser can actually read read the JavaScript that ends up coming out of it. So what's happening is we're putting this in a script tag, a special type of script tag, and then we have these functions, okay? Now let's reverse engineer kind of what's going on here. The first thing that the most important thing to notice is the index. This will become clear when we do a Create React app, but I just want to show this as a way of kind of like showing what's going on in the code whenever you look at this code sandbox that Kent Dodds does in his course and in the curriculum. So essentially what happens is it does something very familiar, right? So we have this document.get element by ID, and then it's going to render something. In this case, it's going to render what we call JSX. So React DOM.render is what mounts this to the actual DOM, and then it takes care of the rest. So you have to do this once in an application, and then once you do it, you're good to go. And again, that's bootstrapped for you and create React app, but I just want to point it out. And the actual root element that it's looking at is this very, very top div element. So what happens is when the browser is loading this HTML document, it'll load up the body of this, and then once it does, it starts loading these script tags. And then once it loads these script tags, it starts loading up these functions. And then whenever it does the render here, it actually will then start calling these functions. So in a lot of ways, you can think of React components as just functions. I mean, we call them functional components, and you can structure them. But you end up structuring them in like a markup style, kind of like you would HTML. That's why it's this. So you'll notice that I have a weather function, but I'm using it like kind of like a weather, kind of like an HTML tag here. So we have React DOM that's kind of coming from this library that's imported up here. Okay. We're going to render this element, and this element is composed of a bunch of sub elements. So like if I were to look at this, we have a body. The body function then returns more markup, including another component, weather component. And then it also renders this. And then the header just returns a header tag with kind of this title weather app. Let me get this working again. Not sure why this is. It says whether the above range component. Oh, it's because I'm not returning anything. So I want to return, and you can wrap a return in parentheses, and we'll do that. Okay. Okay. So I have this render. It's rendering element. Element is just a div wrapping a header and a body. Okay. So mentally, I can kind of think of it. Okay. So that's the basic kind of outline of my application. I have a header and I have a body. I could have a footer. I could have a sidebar. I could have a bunch of other things in here. But for this little basic app, this is pretty much all we have, right? So header is just content. So there's no information there. But the body has some content. It has some content that's based on some data. So what I'm doing is I'm creating a date string based off of this date object. So this is how you manipulate dates in JavaScript. There's a whole free code camp lesson on how to do that well. There's also libraries like date functions that will help you do this. But essentially, you have enough you could figure out what's going on here with what we've taught you so far. This is an interpolated string, so I have the backtick here. You can see it there and there. The first thing I want to do is get the month. The thing about the get month, though, is that it returns the index of the month, so I have to do a +1 in order to get the actual month, in this case, June or 6, because our calendar year starts at 1. The next one I'm getting the date, similar thing. I have to get a +1 because I need to, it's only going to give me the index. And then the last one, I'm getting the year. So again, I'm just creating a string that allows me to do this. So what I want to point out is that when you're creating and structuring this JSX, which is what we call this. So this is just HTML, right? But like what we call JSX is where you're using HTML like this in JavaScript. It's a concept that you'll run into a lot with with React. But the idea here is that React uses JSX so that we can treat JavaScript, in this case, this weather function, as if it were a component, like a visual component, because I'm used to working with HTML like a visual component. And at the end of the day, all of your React code ends up boiling down to, like, once the whole tree, the whole component structure is created, it's all just HTML at the end of the day. So you might click into this component, which then has another component, which has another component. You can go as many layers deep as you want. But at the end of the day, when you reach the end of the road on that, the last component's going to have HTML, because what we're ultimately doing is rendering HTML, right? Like, we have to tell the document HTML to actually use. But what I want to show is that, like, with JSX, we can do these cool things. Like, we can render this date string exactly. And this is a variable. This is a JavaScript variable. And this, like, I can just use these curly braces to tell JSX, hey, this is something I want you to pull from the JavaScript side. And so anything that ends up being here ends up being JavaScript, right? So I could do, like, 22 modulo 3, and it would just point out 1, because that's what the value of that is. Or I could say, not, let's do not 20 is greater than 901. Like, that's just, let's see. Should be coming back false. I might have to do something like this. I guess you can't do that. Either way, my point is that, like, when you have something like a JavaScript string or something that you want to give to that you want to render to the page like this, then you can put that into the JavaScript, and then whatever that data is, then you render it to the page like this. So that becomes a lot more important whenever you really start thinking about the important data. So, like, this is just kind of like a reconstruction of, say, like the weather app, that, like, the one that we kind of introduced to you in the last module. The same would be true for, like, the e-commerce or the garage sale app, or the to-do app, whatever you might want. But notice here, like, okay, so if I'm building an app, I'm going to be doing this, something like this, and I'm probably going to have, a lot of these in order to demonstrate a list, right? Well, the best way to demonstrate the power of React would be, and especially whenever I'm talking about this JavaScript aspect of this, would be to say, okay, well, let's say that I do want to repeat this, and I want this to come from, say, a good example being the weather API that we signed up for last time, right? So let's say that you were getting current weather, and I can actually get this from here. And I could do something like base URL here. Oops. So API key is not provided. Sorry, that's hard to see probably, but I think I can just send to my account. I have to sign into that. But the point is that, like, you could theoretically get, like, the response of, like, the forecast API, let's say, something like this, and be able to see this data in, say, like, one of these alerts, or the actual history, like, and see this data coming in from this API. And whenever you're, like, working with that data, then you're able to just tell React, hey, this is the data, and then it ends up kind of doing a lot of the work for you. So I'll show you what I mean. So like, let's say that we made our API call, we already have some data, and it's in an array form, right? So, and let's say it's an array of objects. And let's say we just get 3 days worth, right? So, and I can say that like, you know, so today is Wednesday and I want to get today. And then I also want to get the past. So we'll get Tuesday and then we'll get, you know, Monday. And this might be, this will probably come in like a date. So 2022, 15, whatever. So, but let's just say for the sake of argument, we have this in this form. And then each one of these represents exactly what was the case, right? So I could look up, you know, so let's say Weather Underground. And we will be using real data like from an API on this, but we're just using this as an example. So today was 89, and then yesterday was 91, day before 86. So let's just use that. So 86. And then today was what? I think it was 89. That's actually just for today, earlier today. So let's do the ticket. Oh, I guess I can't go back in time on this. Yeah, so 96. So it's actually high, let's say high is 90, 90, and then 94. So ninety, 90. And then this should be a comma. And then this should be this. Okay. Okay, so now what I can do in React, which is fantastic, is instead of having like a bunch of LIs or a bunch of explicit structures, I can actually just tell React like, okay, here's the data, and here's what I want the data to look like. I'm going to map over this array, data.map. So array.map is something that you should be familiar with, that we've done before. If you don't remember, that's fine. I would just recommend going and familiarizing yourself with it. But essentially, this is like a for loop, right? Except it's going to return an array to React to be able to use to render. And the data that it's going to be returned is actually going to be more JSX. So whenever I do a map, I can just get the actual datum, the actual piece of data, and then I can say something like arrow function, and then whenever I return, I can return an LI. And in that LI, I can do something like render the day and the high. So I can do something like day and then, sorry, datum.day and datum.high. And I did something wrong. So what did I do wrong? So that, oops. Whether by div. So I think if I just like comment this out, then I'm probably, yeah. So it's somewhere in this block that I messed up. Let's see if I just return text. Oh, I know what it was. Yeah, so I forgot to close that tag. So that was my bad. But you can see that like I'm able to tell React like, oh, I have this data structure and I want to be able to return this. Well, now I can actually just structure this in such a way where I don't have to repeat myself. I can keep this nice and concise by doing something like this, right? So this is kind of like demonstrates the power of React. Whenever I am a developer, I'm coming in here and there's a bug, let's say, in the way that this is being rendered. First off, I know exactly where this is because I can say, oh, this weather, I can take a look at the different components that I have and say, oh, I bet it's in the weather component. And I can go to that and I can take a look at it. And then not only that, but I can take a step back and see and say, oh, like this is kind of the structure of this document. And then I can kind of make sure that everything is modular and clean and just easy to read and easy to use. So you may not feel like that's the case, but if once you get in the world and experience the way different code bases can look, you'll quickly kind of understand. It's a challenge, right? So we create really complex applications in today's world, but us as engineers, as developers, you know, our expertise and what helps us bring value to the companies and the organizations that we work for is our ability to work with this stuff. And there's no reason to make your life harder. Just, you know, be able to write clean code and all of that. Yeah, this is really straightforward React code, and it's kind of like a starting place to just kind of demonstrate components and things like that. But again, this is kind of a different way of doing it. We have it in this code sandbox, and we're importing this directly. So let's take a quick second and go through the process of actually creating a React app on our own and using it in VS Code. So the first thing I'm going to do is just go to the React docs, and then which are great, by the way, for the most part. You're going to see a bunch of stuff in there that we are not going to be able to cover in our module, but that's just because there's a lot there. But you'll definitely have what you need to then go to the docs and learn for yourself. So in this case, I'm going to go to React and like create React app on here. Looks like, okay, so this is the reactjs.org. This is what I want. And the recommended tool chain is create a React app. So this actually requires, let me touch on a couple of other concepts here. So React, it allows you to create what we call a single page application, okay? You can read more about like what that might be, but like essentially the idea is that back in the day, we had to refresh the page a lot more. We had to make server calls, and then like, honestly, you would have like a whole set of files, and those files would be represented by what's in your URL here. That's not really how things work anymore. When we use this in our route, that's very different than what we say use in an API. And then if you want to learn more about like what that means, then you can look up what's called the Jamstack. This is kind of what React is. So if you read this, you'll learn that like, you know, React works a little bit differently. It doesn't refresh the page. It just manipulates what's on the document a bunch. And that's like essentially what a single page application is. So if you want to create a single page application, then you can use Create React App. Create React App is a Node module. So those of you who might remember, I talked a lot about one of the powerful pieces of using JavaScript in the server side, like in this case on Node.js, is that a lot of powerful tooling is created in order to help us write better code, whether that's backend or front end. In this case, Node is being used as a way to quickly create a new React application, and also it creates a little development server on our local computers that makes it to where when we make a change, then we automatically see it get refreshed in our React app. And then whenever we want to publish it to the internet, we can run a command like npm run build, and the script in React will build all of your JavaScript and your files to where you can just push it right to some place on the internet that then becomes the application that's internet facing. So those of you who have struggled with kind of like Node and npm and getting it working, you will need that in order to create this. Otherwise, you can use Code Sandbox, which is like it can be easier. But so I already have Node and npx sort of. Already have it installed on my computer. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to stop sharing this, and I'm going to show you my terminal. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to create this application just in my sort of development inside my like development folder. So I have a development folder with a bunch of stuff in it, and I'm going to do in my OK Coders, and then I'm actually going to do what they recommend. So on my other screen, I have the Create React App docs, so I can see it behind, and I'm going to read from it. So npx Create React App, and then what I want to call it, in this case, I'm just going to do OK Coders React 1. So it's going to do a bunch of stuff here. It's going to install React. It's going to start creating all the files. It's going to create a directory. It's going to do lots and lots of things. So while that is being created, I know we've already covered a lot of ground, but does anyone have any questions about what we've talked about so far that I can answer? Okay. So you'll notice the output of this is there's lots of things going on, but it's successfully created. We can cd into this directory. We can change directories into this. And then there's a couple of the scripts that I was talking about. So you could do build, you could run your tests. So writing tests is an important part of all of that. And you can do start to start the development server. So we're going to cd into OK Coders React 1. And then really all I want to do here is I want to open up my VS Code. And I'm actually going to need to exit out of this. And I think I'll need to share, in order to show what's going on, I think I'm going to need to share both my VS Code window as well as my Firefox window. So let me do that. And I know it might be blurry for some of y'all. I apologize, but we will need to show kind of what's going on generally. So, okay, so if you notice what's happened over here is it's created this folder that I just changed into. And it has this whole README about create React app. It has a bunch of information to learn more, resources and things. But this is all template information from the create React app repository. Then it has a package.json. So if you remember, package.json allows us to do a lot of stuff with dependencies and NPM and stuff like that. So this actually is what is the dependencies for React to run. Package.lock and getignore, you don't have to worry about those just yet. And then it has node modules, which comes from node, and then it has public, which public is essentially the base assets, what we call assets. So it's going to have your index.html. It's going to be very similar to what we saw in the code sandbox, but the biggest thing to note is that it has this root element. Okay. And so this is the thing that's going to be served by React whenever we load it up. But the main bulk of your information is going to be here in SRC. So you'll notice you have a couple of things. You have these app files, you have index files, you do have an SVG logo, which I'll show you, and then report web vitals, which you don't have to worry about and set up test up. But these are just to help you get started, but for the most part, you're going to really just focus on this index.js. And the thing about React is because it's kind of like a tree that has these different, like this hierarchy to it, when you find like a root or a parent, you can kind of dig down into it to find what you're looking for. So by knowing that, for instance, this is my highest level part of this component tree, I can use this to go and explore what I want. So you'll notice React.strict mode, but the biggest thing here is app. App is where my code really starts. And in this case, it's just all HTML with some JavaScript mixed in, some React JavaScript. But really, this is you probably normally would have to dig in even further. But so what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to show you what the base application looks like that it creates. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to open up my terminal here. Oops. I don't know how that happened. I'll just do it this way by going to terminal, new terminal. So I have this terminal right here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to do an npm run start, which it was telling me earlier is what starts my development server. So, okay, what happens when I do that? Well, what happens is that React starts a little process. That little process is a node server that compiles all the JavaScript all together, and it spits it out into onto this mount point. The mount point being that root element in this index file. And then it serves it on localhost 3000. So I just go to my browser. It did it for me. It opened up a new tab. And that new tab, it went to localhost 3000. What that means is it's going to my local computer rather than a place on the internet. And it's using a port 3000. That's information you could find here. Like, it's going to tell you that you can go to either of these in order to go to that. That's what the development server is doing for you on your behalf. So it has, to kind of point out a couple things, it has the main app is this kind of background with this gray color. It has it's in a header tag. It has this image, and this image has a class name. If we were to go to the CSS, I think it's in app.css that has the rotate. Yeah, so this is what's calling this CSS is what's causing it to spin. And then it just has a link to reactjs.org. So this is going to take me to the docs for React here. So this is Create React App. This is like the way to get started. And like almost always, the first thing I do is I just end up deleting a bunch of this stuff, which is what we'll end up doing. But so I would try this out yourself. You can go in and like make changes to what's going on here in the app file, and then you can start to see how this works by playing around with yourself. Like what happens if I get rid of certain things? What happens if I delete certain files? And then you can, in figuring out what you can ignore and what you can't. But so for instance, one of the first things I always do is I get rid of this title up here, and then I start reformatting to create the base application that I want to create. But this is a really, really great starting point. It's not too much, but it's kind of got a layout to it. It's got some basics to kind of get you started. One thing I do kind of wish that they would do is do something like this. So you can create a new folder here and then just say like app. And then if I wanted to move my JS here, my CSS, and my test, then I can move that here. And in order to fix that, I have to make sure that let's see, I think it's this. Yeah. So since I moved it, it had a wrong import, so I had to make sure that it was looking another layer down. So so essentially what I'm pointing out here is that like I can organize my code in a way that like makes this more readable and makes this more where it's not just a big list of files. So in this case, you can organize that, and you can keep doing this as the application grows. Like in our weather example, we could have a weather folder. We could have the header folder and all of that. So notice how like it's already allowing us to make more like modular code, and then it allows us to keep it really clean. So cool. So remember that you have this curriculum to go off of, the outside class work schedule. So there's a lot of stuff that we are expecting you to kind of continue to gain context on. Notice, or should I say, like, be encouraged by the fact that like when you're learning React, you're learning a lot of things. You already know JavaScript, but you're learning more JavaScript and how to use more advanced JavaScript tactics. You're learning JSX, and you're learning how to use like tooling with Node and all that kind of stuff. So know that like it is a lot at once, but like you're putting a bunch of pieces together in order to be able to build something really quickly, which is really cool. So continue to work through all of these things here and all of these things here for day 2, classes and styling, event handlers, and all that. The next thing we're going to do is talk about props and state. So there's a props here, and then there's a use state hook that we're going to use. And essentially where we're going with this is how do we, so if we're giving control of rendering over to React, how do we then like tell React more intelligently what to do? And that's what React hooks let us do, and props as well. So cool. If anyone has any questions, feel free to stick around for a second. For everyone else, thanks for coming to Module 4, and we will see y'all at the Tailwind offices The new address should be in the invite on Saturday, if you can make it. So, all right, thanks everybody. I'm gonna stop stop recording, and if anyone has any questions, we can chat for a second.